All right, we're live. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the RotoPros pre-lock show for Tuesday. And let's start out with the pitching choices. So, on the high end, we've got Corey Kluber, 12,100. And I really think it does make sense to have Kluber in basically every lineup today. He's only marginally more expensive than the other high-end pitchers, and he's just so much better than all of them. It's an easier matchup for him, too. So Ohtani against the Red Sox, Price in LA, zero consideration for David Price today. I'll get to that in a minute. But Ohtani is a little bit cheaper than Kluber. Corbin is a decent amount cheaper. McCullers, fairly reasonably priced also, I'd say. But Kluber is just, I mean, you could argue that Kluber is the best fantasy pitcher and maybe even the best pitcher in all of baseball right now. He seems to be getting better somehow. And it's pretty incredible because he's already really, really good. So this year, his ERA is 157. Peripherals kind of look the same as last year. Strikeout rate's a little down. Walk rate's about the same. I mean, there isn't a pitcher close to as good as him today. So in a matchup against the Twins in a game that's at a neutral park, his price is too low. Like, he should be 13 or 14,000, and he just isn't. He's got the most upside, safest floor. His ownership should be very high. I would guess 60% maybe, but that's not nearly high enough. I mean, pitching is safer than hitting, and I'm not going to fade him purely for ownership. So if you want to make, I don't know, one lineup or something that doesn't include him, then fine. But I mean, I think it's really just, it's almost a no-brainer to use him tonight. And if it doesn't work out, I mean, anything can happen, but the probability of Kluber not doing well tonight is pretty low. Twins offense is kind of just mediocre, and Kluber gets a ton of strikeouts even in games where he gives up runs. So the floor is very high. Hard to imagine Kluber not scoring at least 15 fantasy points or something, and he could put up 40 plus. I mean, he does it pretty regularly. So Kluber nearly all in for me, if not entirely all in. The other pitching choices are tough, though. Kind of hard to figure out what to do here. I think Ohtani makes sense against the Red Sox. Their lineup is a little bit weaker than normal without Xander Bogaerts. Do we have? Let's see if we have it. We don't have an official Red Sox lineup yet. I think there's a chance that Mookie Betts is out. He got hurt on Sunday. He's supposed to play. It was Saturday that he got injured, and he sat out on Sunday. But Mookie should be in there. The Red Sox offense is still a little top-heavy, though. Like, after Betts, Benintendi, Hanley is decent. JD Martinez is really good. You get a bunch of maybe average to below average hitters. Jackie Bradley, Christian Vasquez, Brock Holt, not particularly good hitters. And Ohtani seems to have the strikeout stuff to be able to do well in any matchup. So I think Ohtani does make sense even at a pretty high price tag. It's just it's going to be hard to fit offenses with him. So it probably is necessary to use some cheaper choices. Patrick Corbin is the next guy for me. I prefer Ohtani, I think, which kind of contradicts where I was going when Greg and I did the podcast last night. But the reason I may end up with more Corbin is actually not because I think he's a better play for his price. I do think it's Ohtani. I think he's a better pitcher than Corbin. The Giants do have righties that aren't going to strike out very much. So maybe the matchup isn't quite as big of a difference between the Giants and the Red Sox as it might seem on the surface, even though the Red Sox are a much more highly regarded team. But in terms of strikeout rate, the Giants are going to be pretty low this year too, probably. And they do have a lot of right-handed bats. But I may go with Corbin anyway, just because that $1,100 in salary savings is going to be pretty necessary if you want to fit in expensive offenses. So I'll put it this way. Ohtani is my preferred option. And if you're making cheaper stacks like the Rays or the Reds or some other team like that, then definitely use more Ohtani than Corbin. But I have no problem using Kluber, Corbin, and an expensive team. And it actually isn't terribly difficult to fit expensive offenses in with Corey Kluber and Patrick Corbin. because one of the things that is helpful on a larger slate, 12-game slates are kind of just annoying because there are just so many choices most of the time. So that's a negative. But one positive is that with so many choices, there's a lot of plugs you can use. And there are some very cheap hitters in pretty good spots in several of these lineups. So you can make a 5-man stack that's pretty expensive with expensive pitchers and then just save your salary by using cheap fill-ins. And I'll get to some of those guys in a minute. But other pitching choices, Lance McCullers is somewhat intriguing, although he does have pretty significant home road splits throughout his career. And that kind of has me off him. I mean, in Seattle, it's a pretty tough matchup. The Mariners have a good offense, and the park is about a neutral park. It's kind of just an okay spot for McCullers, and I would just rather use Corbin. I think Corbin will be more popular, so for lower ownership, McCullers is going to have lower ownership than Corbin. I'm nearly certain of that, especially after the bad game that McCullers just had in Minnesota last time out. So maybe he makes for a decent pivot, but I still prefer Corbin anyway. The next pitcher to consider is probably Alex Wood, although the more I look at him, the less optimistic I am. The upside is always capped for Dodgers starters because they go to their bullpen pretty early, more so than most teams. That actually hasn't seemed to be as true this year, but still somewhat of an effect there. But Alex Wood's velocity compared to last year looks kind of similar on the surface. The problem is that Alex Wood was throwing a lot harder at the beginning of last year and a lot softer at the end of last year. So his velocity numbers are actually closer to his second half of last year. And in the second half of last year, he was not very good at all. He had a 3.89 ERA, but he only struck out 6.8 batters per 9 innings, 2 walks per 9 innings. I mean, he was still okay, 476 FIP, 419 xFIP. Not a terrible pitcher by any means, but he was only just maybe average. And 8,200 for an average pitcher on the road in San Diego, I mean, maybe that's an okay price, but I'm not really too thrilled about using him there. So I don't know. I might mix in a little bit of Alex Wood, but I think I'd rather take a shot on someone like Nick Pivetta, who has been striking out a ton of batters this year. Tough matchup for him too. Maybe Gio Gonzalez, kind of the same thing. I think all those pitchers are pretty similar. So for the most part, I really want to try to use Kluber and Ohtani or Kluber and Corbin. I wouldn't go with Ohtani and Corbin just to save the salary because, like I said, Kluber is by far the best choice. Maybe that's something to do in 1 or 2 lineups where you don't want to use Kluber if you're not comfortable being all in on him. But I just don't like this mid-tier for pitching tonight. I think Wood, the more I look at him, just seems kind of overrated. He had this one stretch at the beginning of last year where he was very, very good, and for the most part, he just isn't that good. And it's an easy matchup, but it's not that easy of a matchup. San Diego used to be an extreme pitcher's park. Now it's kind of a neutral park. So I'm kind of just I'm indifferent on Alex Wood, Nick Pivetta, Gio Gonzalez. I think all of them are usable, but I'd rather just spend up and use cheaper offense. The one strategy that might be interesting, though, is going way, way cheap at pitching. So we have Trevor Cahill and Yanni Chirinos. And Chirinos actually seems pretty decent. He doesn't strike out a ton of batters, but he's generated a really high ground ball rate, and that was kind of his MO in the minor leagues too. He throws a sinker, which is kind of unique for the Rays pitching staff. The rest of them don't really do that. Kind of irrelevant. But Chirinos, I think, is a pretty safe option for his price. Not a ton of upside because he's a converted reliever. The first 2 starts he made, he was on roughly, or he's made 2 total starts, 3 appearances. The first start, he was on roughly a 50 to 60 pitch limit. The second start, 75 or so. So maybe he throws in the 80s or something. And if he pitches well, he should get the win because, well, I'll get to this too. The Rays have a very easy matchup against Matt Moore, so they should win. Chirinos, I think, has a pretty safe floor. I mean, he doesn't seem like he's that good, and he is a rookie. This is only his 3rd career start, and his minor league track record is sort of just mediocre. But if you just want to lock in, I don't know, 10 to 15 points from a nearly min-price pitcher, I think that's pretty reasonable. I mean, maybe Chirinos hits 20 points. He got close to that. I think he did reach that number against the White Sox in his last start. 18.4 because they blew the save and he didn't get the win bonus. But Chirinos, probably my next favorite pitcher outside of the top tier, those top three guys. But Trevor Cahill's interesting too because he was incredibly good in the first half of last season and incredibly bad in the second half of last season. And if he's anywhere close to what he was in the first half, then he's worth using. I mean, even if he's awful, he might still be worth using because we have a right-handed pitcher at home against the White Sox. And Oakland is a pitcher's park. And I'll say this again for the millionth time. It's a pitcher's park overall, but there is home run potential because the reason it's a pitcher's park is because of the expansive foul territory where a lot of foul balls that would go out of play turn into outs. So it's not like the fences are deep. You can still give up home runs there, but on the whole, it does play like a pitcher's park because of those extra foul outs. So Cahill could do well. It's going to be tough to figure out what his pitch limits are. I haven't seen anything on it yet, so I guess we'll have to figure that one out later. But if it's Chirinos versus Cahill for cheap, I probably prefer Chirinos. He's a little bit cheaper, but I think it's okay to mix both of those guys in. I'd rather save the salary with those two, though, compared to using Alex Wood or anyone else in the mid-tier. So that's the route I'm going. Pay up for pitching all the way or use Kluber with someone really cheap, and then you can use an expensive lineup around them. I really don't like the pitchers priced around 8,000, and they could be pretty popular. Pavetta's been really good. Alex Wood is an easy matchup. Maybe even Zach Wheeler after he pitched really well against the Marlins. I'm not buying that Wheeler's good now just because he pitched well against the Marlins. It was one start. So that's probably it for pitching. So let's move on to offense. My favorite stack of the night, well, it's going to be hard to say because there really are two different tiers here. There are going to be offenses that I want to use where I have expensive pitching, and then offenses to use where the pitching is Kluber and a cheap guy. So you can basically fit in anyone if you're doing that. So to start with the best value, the Tampa Bay Rays are at home against Matt Moore. The Rays are not very good offensively, and Tampa is a pitcher's park, so they shouldn't score that many runs, but Matt Moore is awful, and the prices are just so low. So we've got Daniel Robertson leading off 2,800, Hechavarria 2,700, Carlos Gomez 3,400, and Cronin Ramos are 2,800 each. That's as cheap of a stack as you're going to get, and they're at home, and they're facing one of the worst pitchers in baseball in Matt Moore. So I do like the Rays. There are some negatives here. One is the park factor. Matt Moore may just not pitch for very long, and they'll be facing relievers. And Texas doesn't have a good bullpen, but the relievers would still be probably better than starters. And Tampa is going with a very right-hand heavy lineup, so maybe some of these guys get pinch hit for at some point. Brad Miller is out, though, and so is Kevin Kiermaier. So the guy on the bench, it's just Denard Span. Malik Smith is in the starting lineup, so Denard Span probably pinch hits for someone at some point, but maybe it's Robert Refsnyder or Johnny Field or someone at the bottom of the lineup, which wouldn't hurt stacks too much. So the top of the order, the first five guys, definitely a strong stack there. The number 6 hitter, Brandon Snyder, is actually not in the DraftKings player pool tonight. So that is kind of just annoying because Snyder, I don't think is a very good hitter. He's like a 31-year-old journeyman, but he actually has a 168 WRC plus for his career against lefties. But we can't use him. He's not playing. He's not on DraftKings, so can't throw him in there. That kind of just hurts the stack too, because if you're making a couple Rays stacks, you probably do want exposure to the whole lineup, and you can only use 8 of the guys. So I might be very slightly lower on the Rays than I otherwise would have been. Matt Moore pitching against Tampa. Maybe he pitches better because he used to play for the Rays. I don't see it. He's very, very bad. There's only so much you can do when you just have pitches with no movement, don't throw very hard, whatever it is. I don't know. Maybe he has a good game because the Rays are awful. But I still do like the Rays regardless of that. I think they'll be pretty popular. They should be probably the highest owned cheap offense. The other one that could be in contention in that category is the Reds. So I mentioned Cincinnati on the podcast yesterday. Their lineup, it's a pretty good lineup, actually. at least at the top, because Jose Peraza is not a very good hitter. They bumped him down to 7th. Billy Hamilton's not a good hitter, but he steals a ton of bases. So 3,300 for Hamilton with a stolen base upside. Definitely like that price. Jesse Winker is batting 2nd. He's been out a few games, but it's a little bit of a boost there. They still don't have Eugenio Suarez or Scott Schebler, but Winker is a decent prospect, batting 2nd. Definitely like him. Votto makes sense for stacks at 4,400, and then you have Duvall and Jeanette at 3,000 each. I prefer the Reds to the Rays if you can fit them. I think they should score more runs. Junior Guerra probably is as bad as Matt Moore, and it's a better park in Milwaukee than the Rays have in Tampa. So even though it's on the road, I like the Reds for cheap more than the Rays if they fit. It's going to be a little harder to fit them. So if the lineup is Kluber, Ohtani, and the first 5 Reds, you end up plugging in 2 or 3 Rays as the remaining spots because you're going to need savings to be able to fit the Reds with the expensive pitchers. So I definitely like that as a strategy. Wilson Ramos is going to be one of my favorite catcher plays again. So if you're using the first 5 Reds, that doesn't include a catcher. Maybe you put Ramos in that stack too. And then you're going to need second base and shortstop. So Daniel Robertson, Adiani, Hechavarria. Those guys make sense. I mean, Reds-Rays combo stacks could be fairly popular, but I don't think too many people are going to do that. So that is one of my favorite routes, maybe 5 Rays, 3 Reds, 5 Reds, 3 Rays. Lean more towards the red side of it, though. Beyond those 2 teams for cheap offenses, I'm just going to scan quickly before I look into the expensive ones, because I think that's pretty much it for cheap teams. One other team I might have some interest in, Trevor Cahill is bad. Like I said, the second half of last year was really awful, and the A's don't really have a good bullpen either. So no one's going to be on the White Sox tonight, and they're pretty cheap too, about the same prices as the Reds. Slightly more expensive, but that's going to be a very low ownership stack to have. So I don't know, maybe mix them in one lineup. The White Sox offense, I mean, it's bad. They strike out a lot, but there's a lot of power. There's speed in that lineup. Moncada has both. Abreu hits for power. Matt Davidson does. Abisail Garcia and Nicky Delmonico are just kind of whatever, but they're cheap. So I don't mind the White Sox. That's probably my 3rd favorite cheap offense. And all right, I guess it seems like it for the cheap ones. Yeah, let's get into the expensive offenses. All right, comment from Harris. Yeah, there's no third baseman on the Rays or the Reds. Oh, because Brandon Snyder, right, he's not in the player pool. And the third baseman for the Reds is Cliff Pennington today. He's not actually eligible there. So when I get to plugs, I'll cover some of the third basemen. But expensive stacks first. So the Brewers probably are going to be the most popular offense tonight. Sal Romano has looked really bad this season. He actually has more walks than strikeouts. CRA is 587. The Brewers are at home. They got Eric Thames back in the lineup. Ryan Braun's back. Christian Yelich was actually activated off the DL, but he's not playing. So the lineup, we have Kane, Thames, Braun, Shaw, Santana. I mean, it's a pretty strong stack, and they're not that expensive. My concern is ownership. And also, I don't really think Sal Romano is as bad as people think he is. He was sort of okay last year in 16 starts, 7.6 Ks per 9, 3.8 walks per 9, got a decent amount of ground balls, over 50%. He was a pretty well-regarded prospect through the minors, although in AAA last year before he was called up, he wasn't very good. He did have a low ERA, but not a lot of strikeouts. Romano is definitely not someone I'm interested in using, but if he is a good ground ball pitcher that just doesn't strike guys out, but he can keep the ball on the ground, then the Brewers may not do that well against him. And this is one of the stronger sharp money movements from Vegas tonight. The Reds have actually dropped from plus 150 to plus 140, 145 or so, despite the fact that Braun and Thames were upgraded and are in the lineup, and despite the fact that almost everyone is betting on the Brewers tonight. So there is somewhat of an indication that sharp money is on the Reds, and the Brewers may not be quite of as good of a spot as it seems. So I don't know. I would mix in some Brewers. I would play the cheaper ones I think Travis Shaw makes sense if you need a third baseman. He's 4,100, so if you can fit him, he's a good play. But I don't really think Thames and Braun at 4,600 each are really worth using. 3,800 is too cheap for Kane. 3,000 is too cheap for Domingo Santana. I don't really have much interest in Eric Sogard or Lando Arcia or Jacob Nottingham at catcher. So for me, it's going to be the Brewers as plugs. I don't really like the stack so much, especially for the ownership. Thames and Shaw should both be very chalky. So I may just avoid the 2, 3, 4 hitters. I think Domingo Santana is a good play. He has a lot of power, has some speed, batting fifth, RBI opportunities, but he could just hit solo homers. And maybe Santana's the only one on the Brewers who has a good game. Lorenzo Cain too. So I like those two guys. I don't really like the rest of their batting order. The prices are probably fair, but the ownership is going to be high. And even for a 12-game slate, like I think Thames won't be 20% owned or anything because first baseman is a crowded position. But Travis Shaw could be very chalky, so I'd be kind of wary of using him. It is a good spot for him, though. So I'm kind of just going back and forth here on the Brewers. I mean, the lower the stakes are, the more you can play them. At higher stakes, I think the Brewers will be I think they'll be very, very popular. So if like $1 tournament, $3 tournament, $5 tournament, it makes more sense to use them. But I'm still probably going to be leaning more towards the cheaper offenses anyway. And in that price range, there are probably just teams in better spots. So just to list off a couple, we've got the Indians in the Puerto Rico game against Jake Odorizzi. And I'll pull up Odorizzi's stats because he does have a pretty lucky start to the season. The Astros against Ariel Miranda, definitely a good spot, though they're a little more expensive. It's just going to be really hard to fit the Astros tonight. So if you want to use Kluber with Chirinos, Cahill, and fit the Astros, then I think that's a sensible strategy. I probably won't do a lot of that, but some of it makes sense. So looking at Jake Odorizzi against the Indians. Odorizzi has started the year with a 2.20 ERA, but his rates are pretty awful. 7.2 Ks per 9, 5.5 walks per 9. It's only 16 innings, so it's a small sample, but he was really bad last year too. Odorizzi does tend to outperform his peripherals a bit. 4.14 ERA last year with FIP and XFIP over 5. The year before that, he had a 3.7 ERA with FIP and XFIP in the mid-4s. And that's partially because he does seem to generate more pop-ups, a little bit weaker contact than the average pitcher. But he's fly ball prone. So there is a lot of upside against him. And it should be warm and humid. It's Puerto Rico. I mean, there aren't too many better hitting conditions right now at this time of year. It's cold basically everywhere. So it's a favorable spot for the Indians there. And then something I mentioned on the podcast yesterday is that if you look at the Vegas run total lines, like if you were going to bet on the over or under for a specific team's runs, when the game is pick'em, you actually see the run total higher on the away team because the away team is guaranteed to bat in the 9th inning. And if they're winning, and they're the home team, they wouldn't be batting in the 9th inning. So it's a guaranteed 9th plate appearance or 9th time just getting 3 outs. And the other thing is that if the game is tied or it's a close game late, the home team can only win in a walk-off, but there's unlimited potential for how many runs the away team can score in the top of the 9th or in extra innings. So that's why you see that. The away team usually has an edge. The reason we don't consider it too much is because there's also home field advantage. So if you're the away team and you're getting that boost, you're also getting the negative effect of being on the road and the other team has home field advantage. But this is a quirky situation where the Indians are technically the road team, but the game is at a neutral stadium. So it's kind of the best of both worlds there. And Jake Odorizzi's bad. The Twins bullpen's bad. The Indians are guaranteed to have 9 at-bats at least. And the weather and the park factors, I mean, it should be slightly positive because the dimensions of the stadium look pretty neutral, but the weather's good. So the ball could be jumping a bit. No real wind to worry about. I don't think we have an Indians lineup yet, but I'm assuming that it's just the regulars because they haven't actually played since, I think it's Friday. They've had 3 games in a row postponed. I'm just trying to load this here for the Indians lineup. All right. Okay, so we do have one now. Yeah, usual guys. Lindor 4,600, Jose Ramirez 4,800, and Edwin Encarnacion 4,900. I think the way to build with the Indians is to use expensive pitching and leave off one of those three guys in every combination. If you're going to make a 1 through 5 stack, you can use Cahill or Chirinos with Kluber, but I think I'd rather have lineups where it's Alonso over Encarnacion, or leave off Jose Ramirez and use Yan Gomes or Tyler Naquin or Bradley Zimmer, or you can even leave off Lindor in a couple of them, because there's a lot of upside for the Indians, and it's really, I think anyone in their batting order could do well. But Alonso over Encarnacion seems like the easy one because they're both good hitters with a lot of power, but Alonso is a lot cheaper. So I do like both guys, but just from a lineup construction standpoint, Alonso probably makes more sense. And then, like I said, there's cheap plugs everywhere. So you can use the Rays and the Reds to make the Indians work. So that's probably, that could be my favorite offense. I'm not sure. It probably is still the Rays and Reds because I'd rather pay up at pitching. But if you can get the Indians in, then there's a lot of expected output for them. And they should have a lot lower ownership than the Brewers, a lot lower ownership than the A's, who I'll get to in a second. And what other chalky offense? There's one other one. We've got the A's, the Brewers, and the Astros probably will have a decent amount of ownership too. Maybe even the Reds, but those three, the expensive teams, Astros, Brewers, and A's, I think will have the most ownership. So of those three teams, I do like Oakland the most because they're a little easier to fit in. So the Astros are very expensive. You basically can only use them if you're using cheap pitching or not using Kluber. And then the Brewers I talked about already. So the A's against Miguel Gonzalez, who is awful. The White Sox bullpen is awful. Same reason for targeting against them last night. We don't have the lineup yet, but Joyce, Semien, Lowry, Davis, Olson, even Matt Chapman, who's been unbelievable to start the year, and was a highly regarded prospect with a lot of power. So the first 6 guys on Oakland, I'm heavily targeting. Matt Joyce especially, though, because he's only 3,100. He'll be easy to fit. But if you have the salary for the A's, I think I prefer the Indians, but it's close. Like, I definitely like both of those offenses a lot, and more so than the Astros and the Brewers. So what else is left to cover? Going to go through some of the plugs here because we do have a lot of lineups out. So if you need a ton of salary savings, Robert Refsnyder on the Rays is 2,100, batting 7th. I think he makes sense as a plug to get some of these other expensive hitters in. Sean Rodriguez is batting 1st for the Pirates. He's better against left-handed pitching, and he's facing a righty, but 2,400 for a leadoff hitter that's even remotely decent. He's worth using. You have Isaiah Kiner Falafa. I don't know how you say that guy's name, but just call him Falafel, I guess. He's 2,400, batting 2nd. So he's probably worth considering. And then let's see, who else do we have? Mets, no one really cheap. Moises Sierra batting 5th for the Nationals. I don't know much about him, but good lineup spot. I mean, he should have RBI opportunities batting behind Trey Turner, Bryce Harper, and Ryan Zimmerman, although Zimmerman has been arguably the worst hitter in baseball this year. Sierra is okay, I guess. He had decent minor league numbers, but nothing special. So let's see, who else do we have? Got the Reds guys. No one that cheap on the Reds. That might be it for cheap plugs, actually. But, I mean, the Rays and Reds just have a lot of moderately cheap players. No one that's like min price or anything outside of Refsnyder. Sean Rodriguez has 1st and 2nd base eligibility, so I think he's a good play. He's probably someone I'm going to use a lot of. And then we don't have lineups for the late games yet. We'll see who's playing. I mean, the Padres could have some cheap righties. Maybe someone like Matt Caesar bats 1st, and he's 2,400. Hunter Renfroe is 3,000. I mean, if Alex Wood is bad, then Padres righties aren't the worst play in the world. Christian Villanueva is 3,300. He just hits a home run every game, it seems like, or 2 or 3. I don't know. Maybe he's worth considering, but I think there are better, cheaper options. So the one other offense I'll mention before signing off, David Price has been pretty bad to start the year, and no one is going to be on the Angels tonight. They're kind of just priced in the middle where they're just preferred options for everybody. And I mean, Mike Trout might have some ownership, but the rest of the Angels won't. Price's velocity is down, his strikeout rate's down. He got lit up by the Yankees in his last start, and he left the game. I think it was a thumb injury, so maybe he's not fully healthy. And the Angels just are going to go overlooked. I mean, Justin Upton has a ton of power. Ian Kinsler batting first, 4,100. Zach Cozart, 4,600. Andrelton Simmons, 3,600. The prices just seem kind of fair across the board, except for Trout. He probably should be more expensive than that on every slate. But the reason to target the Angels is just no one's going to have them. There's also some correlation with Ohtani, and there is some sharper money on the line movement for the Angels. So they opened at minus 140. They're up to minus 165. The total 7.5 is up to 8. So the Angels are getting the sharper dollars from Vegas. The public is actually siding with the Red Sox and the under. I mean, it makes sense. David Price versus Shohei Ohtani seems like a pitcher's duel. Ohtani should do well, but I'm not sure about Price. So I do like the Angels. I mean, if you have the money to pay up for an expensive hitter, I think a lot of people are going to go with Harper against Zach Wheeler. Trout should have less ownership than Harper. So I do like Trout. I like the Angels. Might only make a stack or two of them because there are just a lot of good choices tonight. But yeah, lots of upside there. Potentially the Red Sox bullpen is bad, so maybe those guys come in the game. But that is going to wrap it up. Let's see. Any more questions from anyone watching? Don't think so. All right. Thanks for tuning in. You can find all our stuff at RotoPros.com. I'll be back tomorrow. Nick is away this week, so I'm not sure if I'll be doing it by myself or someone else will be joining. But that's it for today, and good luck, everyone.